live for my leaf samples, and the leaf samples were telling me what the plant was taking up and what it had in the leaf. And yes, things like boron and zinc, which are in avocado production, are major problems when it comes to deficiency. I never had any of those issues in my leaf samples. So yes, for me, those things all started falling into place with the microbial populations being as they were. So for me, the more diverse the populations, as I said to you earlier, diversity is king. Okay, that's the soil. Varieties, well, I planted 7 different varieties, and all on Edrenal rootstock. And yeah, I could tell you a little bit about every variety, but the market is, when you know organic game, I was the only person exporting in my box to Europe. And so I went to specific clients that we had to find. The marketing was tough. It was hard. It was, but the clients that I dealt with valued quality. And so I had to put quality in a box, whereas conventional, they could get away with stuff that was sub quality, because on the whole, everything was pooled. And they went generally to the markets like Rungus and those places. And look, things have improved since I've stopped farming, where now people are taking them straight to their own ripening. Marketers are taking them to their own ripening rooms before they go to the markets. In the old days, green skin fruits still had a big role to play in Europe on certain markets at certain times. Today, South Africa is one of the few countries that promotes a green or likes a big green skin fruit, that being your Fuerte, your Edrenal, your Pinkerton, those sort of things. The world market has been built on the Hass variety, and you get different sub varieties of Hass, which come in a little bit earlier than the original Hass variety, and a little bit later, like a lamb Hass. A lamb Hass, like just where I came from in Nelspruit, you would have finished harvesting your normal Hass by June. They've just harvested their lamb Hass now. And that's beneficial, because you can come on the market later than other people when the window is open for export and the prices are good. So yes, today's market marketing is different to it. When I was there, I needed to keep my market going for as long as I could, locally and also overseas, because I was the only person sending to them. So they accepted my green skins, they accepted my black skin fruit. So the marketing was totally different. As an organic grower, I commanded a price. Now, we were taught at Varsity, I don't know whether you were, that farmers are price takers. I loathed hearing that. And so I was determined that I was never going to become a price taker. I was always going to become a price maker. And being organic, I could demand a price, whereas the other guys took what came their way. And they could get the industry had years where people had to pay in. And then they had years where they got far better prices than I got, but they never ever knew what was going to come their way, because places like Mexico, Peru, Chile, those places are enormous, and they're the real home of avocado growing, not South Africa.
Hi, Don.
And they could, yeah.
Hi. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've covered this already. Just before you carry on markets, I'm not sure if I missed this. Maybe your yields. What sort of yields were you getting on your farm, on your organic farm?
Yeah. All right. I found my trees were a lot more consistent with their yields than conventional. Conventional, we had a lot more fluctuation. Look, in our day, people didn't use much sunny. Today, sunny is, or a growth hormone is a big part of it. What we did find was after year 12 to 15, our yields started to decrease. On Hass, we could do anywhere between 13 to 15 tons a hectare.
Okay. Which stock?
Sorry?
Okay. So you're saying 12 to 15 after how many years? 10 to 12? 12 years?
From 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, we used to do those kind of yields. Not average, because you do have your on year and your off year with the ever, even if it's, but I found our off years were not as bad as the conventional guys. And I never ever really understood that. But yes, what did happen was after year 12 to 15, it was there and thereabouts. Different aspects on the farm responded differently. And so, because they had different microclimates, etc. But yes, so that's why I say between 12 and 15. If I could have my way now, and I could do what I did do, I'd do it again. I would strip a land at 15 years, and I would replant, but I would replant at a far higher density than I was. In the old days, I planted everything on a 7.5 by 7.5. When I left, I was planting on a 7.5 by 7.35. So I took the 7.5 and I cut it in half because my irrigation system had been worked out to that spacing. So that's why I stuck with that kind of spacing, but I just doubled up the trees. So I went from 200 trees a hectare to 400 trees a hectare. And I know now my son is managing our old farm conventionally, and yes, they are reaping the rewards. They do use sunny. So what happens is one of the reasons why the yields would start to drop is the tree becomes with conventional farming. You can trigger your root and your shoot flush compared to when you're using compost. When you're using compost, you get to almost like a point where you've got microbe saturation. And I've spoken to citrus growers who I was there last year down in Willowmore, visiting organic citrus farmers, and they've just hit that what they call micro saturation, where you cannot, your tree just gets given. When it wants it, it just takes it. So let's talk about an avo, okay? An avo, why does a tree set fruit? A tree sets fruit in order to keep the species going. So if it's in a forest jungle where it's growing well, etc., it just produces a few fruit. If it's in a position where it's stressed, what it does is it produces what we call a death crop, and it produces hundreds of fruit. But they won't become the big size. But what they'll do is they just want to make sure that the species survives. So that's what fruiting is all about. And so what you need to do is when your fruit first comes, when your fruit is set, you must not stimulate growth. All right, because what happens is that your new growing tip will push through the flowering bud, and where you've got all those flowers, and that will become your dominant source. So your nutrients bypass your fruiting, so fruit starts to drop off right at that very, very early stage when it's just a pinhead size. And so I once did trials on knocking that off on small trees, knocking that new growth off, and it was a phenomenal the size increase I got, and also the yield, and hence because the size increase, you get a far greater tonnage per hectare. So that tells you that what happens with a thing like sunny, etc., you stop that growth. All right. So that's a hormonal control of that. Whereas in organic farming, you have not got that. Also, what happens is with chemical farming, with a hormonal control, your internode length is reduced to approximately a quarter of the length of an organic tree. Now, with that internode growing so fast, the tree is happy. So why must I hang on to fruit? So your second fruit drop comes in December, January, or November, December, January. Okay, so you don't want to put nitrogen fertilizer on. You don't want to overwater, irrigate your tree up until then. You actually want to stress it. So it hangs on to that fruit. But when straight after that last fruit, the second fruit drop, you need to now get that fruit that's sitting on the tree. You need to get that fruit covered with leaves and as big as you can, and so it can fill out as big as you can. And that tree must also get energy reserves to flower the following season. So you need to fertilize it in the beginning of the new year as much as you can. You need to water it. You need to look after you mollycoddle it through there. Okay, so that is basically the cycle of an avocado and how you hang on to your fruit. Now, with natural organic farming, you can't do that because it's the microbes. That's when the tree says, hey, to the mycorrhiza, hey, have you got a beer for me? And he says, yeah, I got a beer for you, but you give me a slab of chocolate. And that's how they work. They live off each other. And so the one will happily swap a bar of chocolate for a beer. And so yes, they get so the flush keeps going. And you understand what I'm trying to explain there, how it works. And so you can't control that. When you get to 12 to 50 years now, your trees are in such a happy space that they just keep producing vegetatively. And so you end up, because it's you're growing vegetatively, you end up pruning a lot more than you do on a conventional tree, because your internodes have been growing that much more. And once you start to get into a heavy pruning cycle, it does affect your yields. So what I had been trying, and I didn't stay long enough to actually do all the research, etc., but was my new philosophy was that anywhere between 12 and 15 years, block the orchard, pull it out, but come in with a double spacing and get back into production as quickly as possible, and so that you get your yields back again. Now, I was scorned at for that philosophy. I do believe that people are talking about it now. I stopped farming 6 years ago, and I do believe that people are talking about that kind of thing coming into the future. And so yes, it's today I know my son's just planted citrus, these easy peelers, and he's just planted 1,500 trees a hectare. And so yes, these are the places where people are going. It's madness, but he was getting, I can't remember the yields in year 2. He pulled off something like about 30 tons a hectare in year 2. But that's because of the number of trees he's got.
With citrus, yes. In year 2, year 3, you're looking at anything between 30 to 50 tons per hectare. But yeah, my question is, if you were pulling about 10 to 12 to 15 tons per hectare on your black skins and organic farming, what were the yields like earlier on? Because in my mind, a tree, once it gets to anywhere between year 5 to year 7, it's already, it should be at its optimum. We can differ when it's still anything between year 2 to year 3. But I would like to think even for an organic organic grown tree at year 5 to year 6, you should be pulling in high yields. So that's why I'm asking what number.
All right. Okay. I started farming in 1991. We sat with a drought until 1994 when Des Moines broke the drought. I planted 80 hectares in dryland and managed 80 hectares for dryland. And so for me, my first 3 to 4 years was watering with a bucket every week to every tree. And so it's not a true fair reflection. You know, you take the way the guys have got underground drip and fertigation and all these kind of things these days. It's a whole different ball game. So yes, I unfortunately never ever got there, and I never ever went there. I did start putting in micro irrigation when I went to the double spacing, but it was a micro that spread a 4-meter radius so I could get a decent wetting underneath the trees. So yes, I never ever got to that. What's the name? I did. I was at once when I did come down here. I'd spoken to Prof Modi, and the two of us, I had been registered on the university payroll, but we never ever got going as to seeing what trials we could be doing and what we could be doing to see how we could get it into a far more structured type of thing, and not just my own situation, my own feelings and my own observations. So yes, but that because of the striking, etc., in the first year, we gave that up, and we just I started doing other stuff. I started doing community work, and I couldn't get out of it. So yeah, so yes, unfortunately, maybe if we had the first 3 years to 4 years of reasonable rainfall or whatever, or I would have had. I just bought the farm, so I hadn't made dams yet. I hadn't made water yet, and so what I ended up doing was pumping little puddles in my river together to one big puddle, and then pumping into water carts from there. So yeah, it was an ideal start, but that maybe would have been from 10 to 13 years would have been my optimum, and then I would have pulled out.
Was this in KZN?
No, this was in Nelspruit.
Nelspruit. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Look, microclimates play a big difference when Nelspruit's a lot more harsh than, for argument's sake, Heinetzkloof or Heinetzberg, I mean, or Zanin, or even up there in the Sopansberg, and down here in Natal. You guys are a lot more tropical than we were. We were a little bit harsher than you guys, but still, that's not any excuse. But we pulled off our packouts were good. Our quality was superb. So yes, we got a better shelf life than where the Saga, the other industry, were doing millions of rands worth of research trying to get avos onto the European market with a better shelf life. The first time I ever sent fruit to Europe, the guys phoned me after a week and they said to me, "You picked fruit that was the oil contents weren't high enough, and you've picked unripe fruit." And I said to them, "Whoa, no, hang on. This is, it was lots of money, hey?" And what the whole thing was worth for me. And a couple of days later, they phoned me and they said, "No, it's starting to ripen and to turn." And for every variety, it was a new experience. And we had to send a container every time. And so and it takes 3 weeks for a container to get to Europe. So I was also told that they were, by the guys, because we didn't do anything for stem rot, or we didn't put a wax on, we did nothing. All we did was we put it on a brush, we brushed it up, and then we packed it straight into a box and shipped it. So that was, internal quality was superb, and the microbial population on the outside was also well balanced. And otherwise, I would never have got that stuff there without stem end rot or any of those other problems that the conventional guys have. So and all the years I did export, we never ever had a problem like that. And but for the first, sorry,
on both your black and greenskin.
Greenskins, it's interesting. I had Pinkerton, and Pinkerton, the biggest problem with Pinkerton was a calcium to nitrogen ratio or something like that. So they tell me, and I've never never ever had an issue with that ever on my farm. And my son, who's managing the farm now, 6 years later, he tells me it's their biggest problem with internal qualities because of the imbalance. And yeah, so I never ever once had a problem with exporting Pinkerton. So yeah, that's and so yes, with all of that. Look, another thing is, look, if you get involved with organic farming, if you've got a love for money, don't and you want to become the richest farmer and the biggest farmer, don't do organic farming. Organic farming is a way of life. It is it gives you a quality of life that's second to none. It's got to become, it is your hobby. And when I used to go running in the evening, I used to go and lie down in the orchards and listen to the insects and watch the insects and look for the fungus underneath the trees, and see what fungus was growing there and what was happening with my root tips to see whether they were white or whether I had Phytophthora and they were in black. I used to do that, and that I used to disappear. But for me, that was being in heaven. And so yes, it was a whole different ball game to what most people, that they wanted to be on the golf course and having a game of golf. I've aspired to that. I also, what I did was, if we can go back, I'll tell you what we did with making compost, and just to show you how diverse we actually were. Could we go back to that picture with the double chop machine, that tractor pulling yes, this one. Okay, the picture on the right hand side is a tractor pulling a thing called a double chop machine. Now I had cattle, right? Because I believe cattle are or not, livestock is the true basis of the starter of a good compost. And I really believe you've got to have a minimum of 10% animal component in that. Okay, with a good compost, moisture, microbial diversity, and your carbon to nitrogen ratio, and oxygen, and your oxygen levels. Those four things are the things that make a good compost. All right. Why the oxygen and why the moisture is so that your microbes can be fed, because it's the microbes that break down your compost quickly. That on the left-hand side, we imported this turner from Austria, and you can see in the front there's a dribble of water. As we go along and we turn it, it throws the outside in and the inside out. Okay. You can see at the back here, it's not only steam coming out, there's also carbon dioxide coming out, that the microbes have used up all the oxygen, and they stop operating when they've got no more oxygen and so you need to get that carbon dioxide out. So what we would do is we would do a carbon dioxide test, and we had a special little machine for that, and we also would take temperature tests. This system that you're seeing here now, we would take raw material and we would make compost that was ready for use within 5.5 to 6 weeks. Okay, going back to the picture on the right hand side, that tractor, okay, used to have the double chop machine. We would, if I had an old cattle camp or otherwise my roads all used to get double chopped. I wouldn't slash them with a slasher. I would use a double chop machine, which would go into the trailer. The trailer that would then take the stuff and they would put it in the holding pen for my milking parlor. The holding pen, the animals, when they come into the dairy cows, when they come into a milking parlor, I don't know if you've ever observed them, but okay, first of all, we put it on the ground, and so then they would stand on top of it. As soon as you switch on a milking machine, it's a suction, and it goes, and it's just, when the animals hear that, they automatically think, oh, we're going to be able to let this milk go now, and they urinate and they defecate. What they do is, on this grass that's already been broken up and chopped up, your bacteria and your fungi start to get into that. Now, 2 to 3 times a week, I would take it and put it on my compost pile as I made up my compost pile. And that would be the basis of my organic microbial population in my compost, and I'd have a whole lot of other mix. A lot of it was prunings from my cassarinas or my avocados, and we'd chop that and we'd put that in. Some of it was pine bark. I'd also put clay in it, because clay is a good holder for your microbes and your elements, your NPs and K, your nutrients in your compost. What else? Yeah, so that was for me what was feeding your soil, because your soil is like, if you don't have a decent soil, don't go organic farming. If you can't look after that farm, you're not the soil's not going to look after you. You're not going to survive, and you're going to get disease. You're going to get all those other things that are going to start coming. You know yourselves, where do the fungi overnight? Where do they live? They're on the soil. They're there and thereabouts. But what keeps them from getting onto your vegetables? I also did a whole lot of vegetables, as well as the dairy, and I had beef cows. And yes, on the vegetables, what keeps all your fungi and that sort of stuff off your vegetables is the balance within your soils. There's a healthy balance that where your good bacteria and fungus compete with your bad, and so they keep each other in control. On the avo tree, Cercospora on your green skins is an issue. Now that is it's overwinters in your leaf mulch underneath your tree, and so if you can keep that leaf mulch healthy with lots of the right kind of fungus. Now, I don't want to get too involved in a fungal dominated compost and a bacteria dominated compost, but trees tend more towards the fungal side than vegetable crops. Vegetable crops tend towards the bacterial side. So yes, you need to keep your fungal populations high, and that's what comes in. That's why I put a lot of wood chips from my prunings of my avos. One of the reasons I'd use avo prunings is because there are microbes on those avos that are specific to avos. And so I was multiplying those, and once they get into the system and they get water and they get oxygen with them and they've got food, they fly. And so yeah, then you put that underneath your tree, and that will balance your Cercospora underneath the tree. It's not look. It's not 100% proof on a crop like Fuerte, but Fuerte was the crop that really was my problem with Cercospora. The other crops, Pinkerton, I never sprayed Pinkerton. I've never sprayed Hass. I've never sprayed lamb Hass. Ryan, I saw it occasionally on Ryan. I wasn't a big Ryan farmer, but I had we had what's those big cannonballs? Reed. I had Reed, and yeah, we got a little bit of Cercospora, but it wasn't even worthwhile mentioning. Edronol did get a little bit of Cercospora, but Edronol was used mainly for the local market, very little for export. So you were allowed a little bit of Cercospora on that, but it was minuscule compared to conventional farmers that I'd seen even spraying copper. And copper is a natural thing anyway, so you are allowed to use copper in organic farming, but they limit the amount of copper that you use. Whenever I did use copper, when I was forced to use copper, I used something like about 10% of what conventional guys use on, and it worked for me. So yeah, the disease load with a good healthy soil and a good healthy microclimate is far less than it is when it's in a harsh environment.
Good, Don. Sorry, Don.
Does that any of that does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. On my side, it does. Yes, I just have a question.
Yeah.
Yes, I just want to know, like, how often did you apply your compost? Apply compost to your trees?
It's such a labor-intensive time consuming thing that I could only afford to do it once. I'll be very honest with you. It is far easier growing vegetables organically than it is growing a long-term tree crop. We dropped when it started to drop, because I'd watched. There were two other organic farmers that had been involved in it, and one of them was Westphalia, and the other one was a guy by the name of Michael Muller. And both of them, when their trees got to a certain age, they also started having problems. But I watched the trees at Evenden here. I reckon that they had more of a problem with the Phytophthora than I did, and that comes back to a organic strategy that you take. There's three different ways you can go organic. You can go organic and you can buy the fertilizer, the compost. You can buy kraal manure as long as it comes from a kraal, which I disagree with, because I don't like taking stuff out of the rural areas because they're already depleted enough nutritionally. So yes, but you can use that. You're not allowed to use feedlot kraal manure, but you can buy in chicken litters that have all been heat treated. So which is also not good. It should not be allowed. But yes, there's very little microbes in it. So yes, you can go that route where you're buying everything, and you can buy products where you are targeting specific problems. Now, I'll give you an example. With the black spot, in the avo industry in the early days, I'm going back 30 years ago. They did research on Cercospora, and at Pretoria University they identified what is it? It wasn't a bacillus. I'm just trying to think. Sorry, it just eludes me the name of it. But anyway, it was a microbe that competed with Cercospora for the food source, because all of them are just looking for food to survive so they can multiply again. And so what they said, okay, if we multiply that one microbe, we will be able to then fill up the food sources with that one, which doesn't give you black spot, and it'll keep the black spot out. And I did argue with them, but I wasn't the professor. And I said, listen, we need whole families and lots of families. I used to operate with a retired professor down in Stellenbosch. She's now passed on, but she was brilliant, and she believed in the same type of philosophy as I did. Was the greater the variety within your family, and the greater your variety between your families, the healthier your whole system would be. And anyway, but yes, I sprayed that thing, and it was the first year I had about a 50% Cercospora damage, worse than what I had before with nothing. The year thereafter, I could not export one green skin or one Fuerte because of the Cercospora. And that is, when you take one thing and you target just one thing, you are looking for trouble. You've got to keep that balance. And so that was why when I started the talk here with you, I said variety, and the bigger your variety in everything, between your crops, between your grasses, between your everything, the better the chances of survival in the organic game. So yes, a tree crop, because of its nature to grow, and it's a long-term thing, it's a lot more difficult than a vegetable crop. A vegetable crop is easy because it's in and it's out. Sweet potato is 5 months, and that's one of the longer ones. So yes, the rest are between 2 and 3-4 months. So yes, you got them in and you got them out. They're easy, and it's a lot easier with that. I have used Bacillus thuringiensis. Bacillus thuringiensis is I'm sure you know it, BT. It's what the thing that they unfortunately have spliced into maize